You just touted how you were proud that OCR was now releasing the list of schools under Title IX investigations, but they're still not naming those Title IX investigations that pertain to sexual harassment, and currently the department doesn't even confirm when a school is under a Clery investigation. So my question is, why not name those schools?
Yeah, we're looking. It's a really good question, and we're looking at that. And there's a whole host of things we're looking at. Where can we add greater transparency? So that's one of the topics that we're discussing back home.
My question for you is, last week we heard from Governor Rauner speaking about the possibility of CPS needing to go into bankruptcy because of its money woes. What's your reaction to that, your thoughts, and what would the ripple effect be if something like that were possible?
Yeah, well, there are a couple things going on here, and obviously we're in Chicago, and obviously this is my home, and I held that job for 7.5 years before I went to DC. So a couple things. First of all, I just hate that the current CEO is on leave or whatever the term is. But before I was here, there was a CEO, Paul Vallis, for about 7 years. I did it for about 7.5. So we had 2 CEOs over 15 years. We had some stability, and like any organization needs stability. And CPS, in the 6 years I've been gone, I think they're probably on their 5th superintendent now and might shortly be on their 6th. And that kind of lack of continuity, that lack of stability, does no kid, isn't good for any child. So it just really makes me sad. In terms of what's going on here in the state, this is another regret or challenge, is that Illinois funds, and we put out through OCR, and some folks picked up on this data, not enough folks, if I can pitch stories, not enough folks did, is how inequitably school districts are funded by states across the nation. And Illinois is one of the most inequitable states in terms of funding. So the children of the poor get much less spent on them than the children of the wealthy in this state. And when I ran the Chicago Public Schools, we got less than half the money than kids 4 or 5 miles north of us along Lake Michigan in Winnetka and Wilmette that they had spent on them every single year. So the children who need the most early childhood, who need the best teachers, who need access to technology, who need all these things, get the least. So there are huge challenges here in Chicago and in the state, and there are huge challenges around the nation. And if education is supposed to be the great equalizer that we talked about and that people profess to believe, in many places, it's like the digital divide that you talked about. The haves get more and the have-nots get less. And that's absolutely true here in this state. And so I think it's incumbent upon all the political leadership here, and it's not a uniquely Illinois problem, although the challenge here is pretty severe. But in far too many states, the rich get more and the poor get less. And for me, it's unfair. It hurts our nation. It's frankly un-American. And so that's the honest conversation we need to have. And these are hard things to fix. California's done some interesting things with weighted student formula that's one model to look at. There's no perfect model. But again, this is a place where writers could use your position to, we have these massive, we talk about achievement gaps, I always talk about opportunity gaps. We have massive opportunity gaps in, frankly, probably the majority of the communities that all of you come from, and somehow all the politicians get a pass on that. It's just the status quo. For me, it's not good enough.
Secretary Duncan, I have a question that I've posed to representatives of the Education Department on several occasions, and I haven't gotten really clear answers. So forgive me if this sounds like a kind of an ambush question. It's not my tactic, but I really...
Go ahead and ambush it, that's okay.
All right, fair. Title I funds have been going to wealthy districts for some time. In 2013, the 10 wealthiest districts in Connecticut got collectively $1.1 million in Title I funding. I'm curious to know, is your administration aware that wealthy districts are getting Title I funds? And if so, what plans do you have in place to make sure that Title I money is actually going to the schools that need it?
Yeah, no, that's not an ambush question at all. It's a very good question. I'm not familiar with those details. I will follow up, have staff follow up with you and see if we can figure it out. And again, it goes back to where we started on ESCA, that Title I dollars are supposed to help to support, not supplement, or not supplant dollars from local school districts to help poor kids who have greater challenges have access to greater educational opportunities. And a bill like the House bill would make that gap even larger. So I'm happy to follow up and try and get details and get you an answer. Those are kinds of questions. It's not an ambush at all. We should be asking and we should be answering.
There's a lot of states that are or a couple of states have entertained these bills this year to say that transgender students should be required to use the restrooms that match their sex at birth and not the gender they identify with. Meanwhile, there have been several civil rights agreements and federal court cases which schools have gotten in trouble for doing that. A lot of folks in the civil rights organizations want the department to issue more specific guidance about the rights of transgender students in schools regarding things like pronoun use, bathrooms, things like that. I know you've said Title IX applies to transgender students, but are you going to say anything more explicit? And if I'm a school in a state that passes one of these laws, what do I do?
It is a very specific question, and we have tried to be as clear as we can. We've been talking about investigations we've done. Some have involved transgender children. I will check with Catherine Lehman, who's doing an amazing job running our Office of Civil Rights, whether we are planning to do more guidance going forward or not. I just think my short, non-legal, non-technical answer is that we need to do everything in schools to help children feel safe, to have them feel supported, to have them feel comfortable. And whether it's transgender children, whether it's children who are gay, whether it's children who are being bullied, when you are living in fear, it's hard to concentrate on AP, biology, or physics, or chemistry. If our kids aren't fed, if they're hungry, it's hard to concentrate in school. So there's a series of things around students' social and emotional and physical health and well-being that for me are foundational, fundamental, and when we meet those, then we can start to talk about doing fantastically academically. But if children are feeling not safe, afraid, scared, bullied, obviously we're doing them no favors. So I don't know the specifics on whether we're going to do more guidance. I do know we are actively involved in some of these cases, and whether states that pass these laws would be in violation of us. That's a very, very fair question.
My question is, what can be done to ensure equitable distribution of teacher talent?
It's a great question, and that's one thing that we would like to see fixed in the current law, and again, these are pretty technical questions, but really good ones. And right now, trying to explain as simply as I can, that school districts do not have to say the actual dollars spent at the school level. And so they can talk about positions, and positions are sort of measured in terms of Title I access or working with us. But as folks here know, a teacher might be worth $35,000 if they're a rookie, or $75,000 if they're a veteran. And we know, not all the time, but in many places, veterans or higher level folks tend to move to the more affluent schools or districts or communities. And again, the poor communities often have less access to fantastic teachers. And so one of the things we would love to close is that loophole in the law that allows districts to just talk about body counts, numbers, and not actual dollars spent at the school level. And that is not in the House or the Senate bill. Been some conversation on the Senate side. But that, for me, would be the best fix to something that, and it's just important for this audience to understand sort of all these factors working against the kids who need the most help. So you have at the state level funding that in many places is inequitable. And then you have within districts funding that is inequitable. And again, in places like here in Chicago, we have places of desperate need in Englewood and North Lawndale. And then we have schools that are on the Gold Coast, and we have some of the highest performing schools in the state. So there's huge ranges and needs of children in just a city like Chicago. And the real honest and fair question is, are the children in Englewood and North Lawndale and Little Village getting access to the same level of resources as children who are going to schools like Northside College Prep and Walter Payton? And unless we can get beyond just counting physical bodies and look at salaries, and we know at the school level that by far the biggest budget item, usually 80-85% of a school's budget, is personnel, is people. So it's not this is not a rounding area. This is the bulk of the resources going to a school. So that's the kind of clarity and again transparency that we'd love to see in a new law. But that's we're getting a lot of pushback on that. That's a hard one.
Well, thank you so much for being with us this year. We know that you have a very busy schedule, so we appreciate you stopping by to talk to us. And thank you to everybody for contributing questions, and sorry we couldn't get to all of them.